You are listening to the Pregnancy Podcast with Vanessa Merton. Hello. Thank you for tuning into the Pregnancy Podcast. This episode is your guide to weaning and how to stop breastfeeding without stress. Most breastfeeding resources are full of information on why you should keep going, and they lack practical help for when you are ready to stop. If you've gone looking for guidance on weaning, you've probably found long lists of reasons not to quit and a pile of anxiety-inducing articles about everything that could possibly go wrong. Breastfeeding is amazing, and I'm a huge advocate for it. But every mom will reach a point when she's ready to stop. And when you're there, you should have access to evidence-based, judgment-free support. So this episode is here to take the anxiety out of stopping breastfeeding. We'll cover when to wean, how to do it gradually and comfortably, how to lower your risk of complications, and how to handle the emotions that can come with closing this chapter. Plus, I'm going to share a very silly hack that I used with both of my babies that really made weaning much easier. You can find the full article and all of the resources for this episode at pregnancypodcast.com/weaning. Every stage of pregnancy and parenthood comes with its own set of questions. Pregnancy Podcast Premium gives you every episode, all with no ads and a private feed that you can listen to in your favorite podcast app. You can search any topic and listen to it right when you need it. Check it out at pregnancypodcast.com/premium. From everyday skincare to treating common pregnancy symptoms like stretch marks with clinically proven ingredients, 8 Sheep Organics has you covered. Every product comes with a 100-day happiness guarantee. Try it risk-free, and if you're not 100% happy with your purchase, simply send them an email and they'll get you a refund, no questions asked. Check out 8 Sheep Organics and save 10% at pregnancypodcast.com/8sheep. AG1 is the daily health drink that combines your multivitamin, pre- and probiotics, superfoods, and antioxidants into one simple scoop. It's one of the easiest things that you can do every day to support your body. Head to drinkag1.com/pregnancypodcast to get a free welcome kit, a free bottle of vitamin D3 plus K2, and a free flavor sampler with your first subscription. Go to drinkag1.com/pregnancypodcast. There's a lot of fantastic breastfeeding resources, and these are great when you're learning how to nurse, you're troubleshooting a specific problem. Where almost every resource falls short is on weaning. Instead of a clear how-to, what you usually find is a list of the benefits of breastfeeding, plenty of reasons not to quit, and tips for fixing issues so that you can keep going. That support is valuable when you want to continue, but there's a huge gap when you're ready to stop. So that is the goal of this episode, is to fill that gap. If you want a full picture on breastfeeding itself, of course, I am a huge advocate for breastfeeding. The Pregnancy Podcast has a lot of resources, and you can find everything at pregnancypodcast.com/breastfeeding. The formal definition of weaning is introducing your baby to food other than breast milk. So in this episode, I'm talking about weaning the way most parents do, which is stopping breastfeeding. Weaning can be baby-led or mother-led, and that depends on who initiates it. A baby rarely decides to stop nursing entirely on their own before at least the age of 2. As children get older, some will decide that they're done, even if mom is not. Mother-led weaning is when you decide that you're ready to stop and you get that process started. There's also a completely different thing called baby-led weaning that refers to feeding solid foods. Rather than the typical spoon feeding of purees, you offer foods that your baby can pick up and feed themselves. But that's not what we're talking about in this episode. When I talk about weaning, I'm talking about weaning off of the breast. If you think that your baby is showing signs that they are ready to stop breastfeeding, it's worth ruling out a nursing strike. A nursing strike is when your baby suddenly refuses to breastfeed. The key word here is suddenly. This is not the same as weaning. That happens gradually and again, rarely occurs on its own before age 2. A nursing strike can happen for all kinds of reasons. It could be something obvious like teething or a cold, or something more subtle like a change in the taste of your milk. A nursing strike can be very stressful, but it's almost always temporary. So if your baby abruptly refuses breastfeeding, you can keep expressing milk to protect your supply. You can avoid forcing feeds. That's going to make everyone more frustrated. And then try nursing when your baby is sleepy or when they're just waking up. If you want a deeper walkthrough on nursing strikes and other feeding issues, there is an episode on troubleshooting common breastfeeding issues, and I will link to that. Another thing we have to talk about is social pressure. It can be very difficult to handle social pressure, and this goes in 2 directions. One, to keep breastfeeding, or to stop. Someone in your life, maybe everyone in your life, is going to have an opinion about how you feed your baby. What you need to know is that other people's opinions don't matter. Now, I know that's easier said than done, but you ultimately need to do what's right for you and your baby, regardless of what anyone else thinks. You might think that the comments are going to run in favor of breastfeeding. Things like, well, why would you quit? It's so good for your baby. Or formula is so expensive and breastfeeding is free. That one really irks me because breastfeeding is only free if your time and energy are worth $0. And that's not the case. There's a lot of value there. What might catch you off guard is comments in the other direction. Like, oh, wow, you're still breastfeeding? A friend once told me that I should stop soon before I wreck my boobs. That was terrible advice. It's worth noting even the American Academy of Pediatrics has flagged this problem directly. In their breastfeeding policy statement, they note that mothers nursing past the first year often feel judged and may even try to hide it to avoid comments. The point being, the pressure is real, but it should not have a bearing on your decision. There's a lot of reasons that moms choose to wean, and all of them are valid. Some mothers stop for health reasons. You may need to take a medication that is not compatible with breastfeeding. If you are taking medication and breastfeeding, the LactMed database is a fantastic resource that gives you a lot of information on drug safety while nursing. It's all evidence-based. You may need a medical procedure that means pausing or stopping. A lot of moms return to work after maternity leave, and then they decide that they don't want to keep pumping. Some babies have food sensitivities that make a mother's diet feel impossibly restrictive. That's another reason some moms stop. Another completely valid reason is that it's not working for you and you don't want to keep going. The challenges of breastfeeding, they're physical, they're emotional, are rarely talked about openly. If you want to continue, I want you to have the support and resources to make that happen. But I also want you to have support and resources when you're ready to stop. You don't owe anyone an explanation when you decide that you're done and you want to stop breastfeeding, whether it's a medical reason or a certain number of months. You don't have to explain that to anyone. Only you can answer the question of when to stop breastfeeding, and every mom and baby is different. The current guidance from the American Academy of Pediatrics, the World Health Organization, is basically exclusive breastfeeding for about the first 6 months. At that point, you introduce solid foods and then continue to breastfeed alongside solids to 2 years or beyond. as long as it works for you and your baby. These are recommendations, they're not requirements. And any amount of breast milk benefits your baby for as long as you decide to continue. There's no threshold that you have to hit in order to do this right. One thing you do need to be aware of, if you stop before your baby's first birthday, then you have to replace breast milk with formula. And that's because babies need one of those two as their main nutrition for the first year. The other thing you need to know is that there are some moments that are just not ideal for weaning. If you have another big transition underway, like you're moving into a new house, it could be worth waiting. Your baby nurses for comfort as much as they do for nutrition. So if you're piling one big change on top of another, that can make things harder on both of you. You may also want to avoid weaning when your baby is sick. Babies and toddlers often nurse more when they don't feel well. It could have something to do with antibodies in your milk. It could just be because your baby finds nursing comforting. Ideally, when you wean, it's during a calm stretch in your life, your baby's healthy, and your life is relatively steady. Before we get into how, there's one principle that everything else rests on. Your milk works on a demand and supply system. So the more that you breastfeed, the more milk you make. And when you nurse less, then you're effectively telling your body to produce less milk. On top of that, once you introduce solid foods around 6 months, your baby will naturally take less milk. A 6-month-old is drinking far more milk and drinking it far more often than a 3-year-old. Your child's age at weaning really shapes the whole process because weaning a 3-year-old and weaning a 6-month-old look very different. The principle of the demand and supply system is also why it is generally recommended that you don't quit cold turkey. Stopping gradually is easier on both your baby and it's easier on your breasts. If you're nursing a 6-month-old throughout the day and you stop all at once, your breasts are still making a lot of milk. And that does raise the risk of problems like plugged ducts or mastitis. If you wean gradually, it gives your supply time to wind down and will keep you more comfortable along the way. Some organizations, like La Leche League, divide weaning into daytime and nighttime. Daytime can be easier because there's lots of distractions that you have access to, like food, activities, other people to lean on. Nighttime is often a little bit harder. And that's because if your baby's crying in the middle of the night, the easiest way to get them to stop is often to feed them. And that's what's going to get them back to sleep the fastest. There's also a very helpful article from Kelly Mom on how to wean, and I will link to that. Let's get into practical tips for weaning. As a preface, not all of these will apply to you. So take the ones that fit your baby's age and your situation, and then you can leave out the rest. The through line through all of this is the same. You want to drop feeds gradually. You want to watch how your body responds and give everyone time to adjust. I mentioned if you stop before your baby's first birthday, then you have to replace breast milk with formula. If you want to stop before your baby turns 1, start by swapping one nursing session for a bottle and then add more over time. This is going to let your supply taper slowly. It's going to lower your risk of plugged ducts and mastitis. There's a simple rhythm that works well here. Drop one feeding, give yourself about 3 days to adjust, and then drop another feeding. Wait about another 3 days, and then keep going until you are gradually giving your baby formula and not breastfeeding. Morning and bedtime feedings are usually the last ones to go, and a lot of moms find it easier to replace a midday feed with a bottle than to swap the breast for a bottle right before bed. So here's some tips for daytime weaning, and you don't have to write any of this down. It's all in the article for this episode. First up, do not offer to breastfeed, but if your baby is asking for it, then don't refuse. This is the gentle don't offer, but don't refuse approach. You may also consider changing your routine. You can adjust where you're spending time at home, what you do first thing in the morning, and how you are leading up to naps. You should also consider planning around your triggers. Babies love routine, so it helps to steer clear of the spots and the moments that usually cue nursing. You may also want to get other people involved. If you normally nurse your baby down for a nap, you can have your partner take over. If you are home alone with your baby, of course, this may not be an option. Another tip is to use distractions. Get out of the house for a walk, take a trip to the park, and you can try and redirect attention away from nursing. If your baby is older than 6 months, you can also offer a snack or food. You can also try making breastfeeding sessions shorter. So instead of doing a full feeding, just nurse for a few minutes. Then we have tips for nighttime weaning. These are a little bit different. One thing you can do is you can change where your child sleeps. You can hand off bedtime, so have your partner or another support person take over getting your child to sleep. You can offer a snack or a drink before bed, a snack before bed if your baby's older than 6 months. I would consider reworking your bedtime routine so that it does not revolve around nursing. Whether that's a bath, books, a lullaby, try some different things to anchor a new routine. Another tip here is to replace the closeness, not just the milk. Nursing is comfort and it's connection as much as it is nutrition. So offer plenty of hugs, holding your baby, and cuddles as you're cutting back on breastfeeding. Another thing you might want to consider is actually talking to your child and explaining to them that nursing is coming to an end. I get it, this may feel very silly with a young baby, but I think babies understand far more than we give them credit for. With an older child, it's genuinely helpful to explain that a change is coming so they can start to accept it, maybe they can understand it a little bit. And this isn't something that you're negotiating, you're just narrating what's about to happen. All of this assumes that you have the luxury of time. But there are some cases that you may not. A medication, a medical emergency, a hospitalization, a sudden separation, that can force you to stop faster than you would possibly choose to. If you're in that situation, the goal shifts to protecting your comfort and lowering your risk of complications while your supply comes down as gently as it can. The big move here is to relieve pressure without fully draining your breasts. Because if your breasts feel engorged and you fully drain them, you're just signaling to your body to keep producing that much milk. So you should express just enough to take the edge off. That could be a couple of minutes of pumping. It could be hand expressing an ounce or two. You can use cold packs. Some moms use an anti-inflammatory to manage swelling and discomfort. And as this is going, watch for warning signs of plugged ducts and mastitis. We'll talk about that because a fast wind down carries a higher risk of those. If you have to stop abruptly for a medical reason, loop in your doctor, your midwife, loop in a lactation consultant. They can all help you manage that transition safely. If you are exclusively pumping or you're pumping alongside nursing, weaning follows that same demand and supply logic. You just apply it to your pumping schedule. Remember, every time you remove milk, even with a pump, you're telling your body to keep producing it. So if you are pumping, gradually drop one pumping session at a time and then lengthen the gaps between the sessions that are left. You can also make sessions slightly shorter and take less milk than you normally would. That's going to send a message to your body to make less milk. The goal here is to go slowly enough that you stay comfortable and you don't end up engorged. Next, we're going to talk about troubleshooting issues that can come up so that you can identify these and tackle them and move past them. Before we do that, I would like to thank the sponsors that have supported this episode. A lot of companies have exclusive discounts for pregnancy podcast listeners. You can always see discounts and promo codes at pregnancypodcast.com/resources. We're getting towards the end of summer. Real life is starting to come back online. Schedules are filling in. Mornings have structure again. And you're rebuilding your routine one habit at a time. AG1 is the daily habit I have that anchors everything else. AG1 is a daily health drink that combines a multivitamin, pre- and probiotics, a methylated B complex, superfoods, and antioxidants into one simple scoop. You know how much I care about research. AG1 goes to great lengths to invest in rigorous peer-reviewed clinical trials. They also test for hundreds of contaminants and impurities. AG1 is NSF certified for sport. That's one of the highest independent quality standards there is. One scoop in the morning with cold water before your day takes over. That's the anchor of my morning routine, and it's worth keeping as this busier season is coming. Head to drinkag1.com/pregnancypodcast. When you first subscribe, you will get a free AG1 welcome kit, a free bottle of vitamin D3 plus K2, and a free AG1 flavor sampler with your first order. Go to drinkag1.com/pregnancypodcast. As a friendly reminder, pregnant or nursing women should seek professional medical advice before taking this or any other dietary supplement. Let's get back to today's episode. A few issues can come up when you're weaning, and the point of learning about them is not to freak you out. It's to help you recognize them early and know what to do. Also, it is entirely possible to wean without any of these problems. One really great resource is a lactation consultant, especially if you or your baby hit a rough patch. Lactation consultants aren't just helpful for keeping breastfeeding going, they can also be great when you're ready to stop. First is engorgement. This happens when your breasts have not fully adjusted to making less milk. So if milk is not removed for too long, your breasts can feel full, they can be heavy, tender, hard, they can even get hot. If you are engorged, express just enough to feel comfortable. The trick is to not completely empty your breasts because that just tells your body to make more. There's no magic number here. You might pump for 2 minutes. You might hand express a single ounce. A warm shower can make it easier if you're hand expressing, but the heat there isn't to fix the engorgement. It's just to make expressing milk easier. If you are uncomfortable because your breasts are engorged, you can try cool compresses. Those tend to work better than heat. And I will link to a Kelly Mom article that has some additional tips on this. Engorgement raises your risk of a plugged duct or mastitis. And this is an area where the guidance has really changed in recent years. For a long time, the standard advice was to attack a plugged duct with heat and firm massage to try and empty the breast as completely and often as possible. So if you were nursing a few years ago, this is probably what you were told. I've had plugged ducts. I've had mastitis when nursing my kids. This is exactly what I did. Well, the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine released a new clinical protocol a couple years ago that reframed how we understand these problems. What we've long considered a plugged duct is not really a solid plug that you need to squeeze out. It's really inflammation, and it's a narrowing of the milk ducts along with swelling in the surrounding tissue. So once you envision this as inflammation rather than a blockage, those old fixes start making less sense. Aggressively massaging, adding heat can actually worsen inflammation. And if you're over emptying your breasts, you're telling your body to make more milk, and that just fuels the cycle that you're trying to break. La Leche League has also updated its guidance to match this. In a notice talking about the change, they describe how the thinking shifted from removing a plug to calming inflammation. So now, under the current approach, there's a few things that replace the old routine. First up is to use cold rather than heat, and that will help ease swelling and pain. You want to skip deep or aggressive massage and any tools like electric toothbrushes or massagers. It was actually used to be recommended that you would use an electric toothbrush on your breast to try and get rid of a plugged duct. That can just aggravate the tissue. If you do anything, you want to use gentle lymphatic drainage. That uses a light sweeping of the skin towards your armpit with about the pressure that you would use to pet a cat. You want to keep feeding your baby on demand from the affected side. You should also resist the urge to add extra pumping sessions to try and empty your breast because that overstimulation can make things worse. An anti-inflammatory like ibuprofen can help with pain. Of course, you should check with your provider before taking any medication, especially if you're breastfeeding. And if you want to look up whether a specific medication is compatible with breastfeeding, the LactMed database is amazing. It's free. It's a very reliable evidence-based resource that summarizes how drugs transfer into milk and how they can affect your baby and your supply. So I mentioned plugged ducts and mastitis. Here's the difference between the two. With a plugged duct, you may notice a firm, tender lump that feels swollen and warm. Mastitis is similar, but the symptoms are more intense. Think flu-like signs like fever, chills, and aches. Mastitis may or may not involve an infection. What happens is bacteria can enter through a crack or a point of damage on the nipple that can turn inflammation into an infection. Some of the old advice still holds for this. If you have a fever or flu-like symptoms, you should contact your doctor or midwife. You should rest as much as you can. And I would talk to your care provider about whether antibiotics are appropriate. Do not wait this out and try to power through it, because untreated mastitis can progress into an abscess that can be a serious health problem. On a personal note, I have been through this and it happened to me. I do not recommend it. When I was breastfeeding my daughter, I got a plugged duct that turned into mastitis and ended up snowballing into a days-long hospital stay for an abscess. In hindsight, I made a lot of mistakes. I kept trying alternative methods to resolve it because at the time, my mindset was that I wanted to avoid antibiotics. In hindsight, that was for sure the wrong call. And had I just taken antibiotics, it probably would have resolved everything way before I landed in the hospital. So please do not make the same mistake. I do share a lot more about what I learned, some of it the hard way, in my episode on lessons learned breastfeeding the second time around, and I'll link to that. One more thing as this relates to weaning, you're trying to slow milk production and eventually stop. But if a plugged duct or mastitis shows up, you may need to pause weaning briefly to get that resolved. You want to get that inflammation under control first, and then once you're comfortable again, you can pick the weaning process back up. There are some things that you can do to actively decrease your milk supply. These are meant for weaning and for extreme oversupply. The evidence behind them is mixed. We'll talk about this. These are things that you only want to use if you are genuinely trying to bring your supply down. First up, one thing you should not do is bind your breasts. This is a very outdated thing. Tightly wrapping your breasts can actually raise your risk of plugged ducts. Wearing a supportive bra, perfectly fine, but do not bind or tightly wrap your breasts. It will not slow milk production and it can make things worse. A classic home remedy for engorgement and for drying up milk is to place cabbage leaves over your breasts. The evidence on this isn't really fantastic. A Cochrane review that looked at treatments for engorgement found that a cabbage leaf extract cream performed no better than a placebo cream. The authors concluded that there is not enough evidence to recommend cabbage leaves widely. It's also worth noting that the studies involved were small. They focused on mothers who intended to keep breastfeeding, so it wasn't really looking at mothers that were trying to wean. If placing a cool cabbage leaf feels really good on your breast, if it's soothing, this is something that is unlikely to do any harm, but I wouldn't count on it to dry up your supply. There's also some cautions when you look into this online that raw cabbage can carry bacteria. If you're looking for the comfort just from the coolness, a clean cold pack could do the same soothing job without that concern. You could also wash the cabbage leaf and eliminate that. Another remedy that you may have heard of to help with this is Sudafed. Sudafed is the brand name for the decongestant pseudoephedrine. This is normally used for a stuffy nose and to relieve sinus pressure. It works by shrinking swollen nasal membranes, and it turns out it can also reduce milk production. In a small study, when I say small, this particular one had just 8 participants. A single 60 milligram dose of pseudoephedrine reduced milk production by about 24% on average over the following 24 hours compared with a placebo. Keep in mind, very small study we're talking about, and while researchers suspect that the effect is related to a drop in prolactin, that change didn't reach statistical significance. This study, although very small, is the main study that people point to when they're talking about Sudafed being an evidence-based remedy, but don't expect a large body of evidence behind it. The LactMed entry for pseudoephedrine, remember that's the best resource for taking any medications when you're breastfeeding, reflects kind of the same picture. A single dose decreases milk production acutely, and that if you are repeatedly using it, it will interfere with lactation. It also mentions that pseudoephedrine has been used deliberately to bring down supply in mothers that make too much. Not a guarantee, but this could be something worth discussing with your doctor or midwife if you want to use it as you're weaning. If you would rather try something more natural than an over-the-counter medication, there's a few herbs that are thought to reduce supply. Sage and jasmine are the 2 most popular. Others like peppermint may also be helpful. For all of these, LactMed has a detailed entry covering how it transfers into breast milk, what it may do to your supply. Kelly Mom also has an in-depth article on herbs that can lower your milk supply. So as with everything that we're talking about to take to actually reduce supply, the evidence is limited. I would treat these as things that you may want to consider incorporating, but I wouldn't expect them to be a magic fix. Also, with all of these, dose matters. I mentioned that sage is one of the most popular herbs to decrease supply. If you have some kind of dinner that's seasoned with sage, I wouldn't panic that it's going to reduce your supply. And if you're using these for the purpose of decreasing your milk production, you're probably taking much more concentrated amounts. After you stop breastfeeding, it's going to take some time to stop producing milk completely. Most mothers will see their milk dry up within a few weeks. You may keep making a small amount for weeks or even months longer, especially if you nursed for a really long time, or if you keep stimulating your breasts by checking whether or not you can still express milk. If you stop breastfeeding and you want to know if your body's still producing milk, you can check this occasionally and see if you can hand express a little bit, but I wouldn't make this a habit because every time that you stimulate your breasts and you remove milk, you're telling your body to keep going longer. Another thing we have to cover is that weaning is not just a physical thing. It can stir up a lot of emotions, sometimes even when you are more than ready to stop breastfeeding. Part of this is situational. It can feel like you're closing a chapter. Part of this is also hormonal. Breastfeeding runs on hormones like prolactin and oxytocin, and as you wean, those levels will shift and decline. Just like you have a sharp drop in hormones after you have your baby, and that can affect your mood, the hormonal changes of weaning can also leave some moms feeling unexpectedly low, a little weepy or emotional, or even a little bit irritable. There is some research connecting the end of breastfeeding to your mood, although there is an important nuance here that we'll talk about. There is a large cohort study of more than 42,000 women that found that stopping breastfeeding was associated with an increase in symptoms of anxiety and depression, and that the effect was strongest for women who had already high levels of anxiety and depression during pregnancy. Another study found that the highest risk of postpartum depression among women who had planned to breastfeed but were not able to. Another study found the highest risk of postpartum depression among women who had planned to breastfeed but were not able to. A lot of this research focuses on early or unplanned cessation rather than having a smooth wind down when you choose that timing. So we can't say for sure that gradual weaning would prevent a low mood, but it lines up with what is widely recommended, which is easing off slowly allows your body to adjust more gradually and often helps with the whole transition. For most moms, this passes. Your body settles into its new normal, but if a low mood lingers, if it deepens, if it's starting to interfere with your daily life, please take it seriously and don't just brush it off as hormones. Reach out to your doctor or midwife, give yourself some patience, a little bit of grace, and some time to adjust to being a parent that no longer breastfeeds. This is genuinely a big life change, and there's no rule that says that you have to adapt instantly. It may take some time. As promised in the intro for this episode, I have a secret weaning hack. This is a little bit ridiculous, slightly embarrassing, but I have breastfed 2 kids. When I was panicking about how to stop breastfeeding my first child, I found this idea buried pages deep in some random online forum. My secret is limes. I cut a slice of lime and squeezed the juice onto my nipples. The tip that I found actually suggested lemons, but I didn't have lemons in my house, but I did have limes, so I used that. I did it. I braced for it to sting because nipples are pretty sensitive. Thankfully, it did not. It was fine. What it did do was make my milk taste sour. At the time, my son was just over 1.5 years, and I explained this to him. I told him that my milk was yucky. And you know what? He didn't believe me. So I let him try it, and he discovered I was right. I did this a few more times. I added lime to my nipples before I was going to breastfeed. I was very prepared for a tantrum, and that never came. This worked like a charm. I do want to be very clear here. It wasn't the limes alone. I was also using a lot of the techniques that we've talked about in today's episode. We had slowed the frequency of nursing way down. My partner was handling bedtimes. I would hop in a hot shower and express a little bit of milk when I got engorged. There were a lot of pieces in play, but I do think that the limes helped. So much so that I tried this again with my daughter. She nursed a couple of times with lime juice on my nipples. I actually worried that it was backfiring and that she would like the sour taste, but she got over breastfeeding too. I'm not saying that putting lemon or lime juice on your nipples is magic, but it might be worth a shot alongside all of the other things that we've talked about in this episode. If At any point in your weaning adventures, you run into difficulty, or you just want someone to help walk you through this, get a lactation consultant. We tend to think of lactation consultants only for the early days of breastfeeding, but they can be just as helpful when it comes time to wean. You can also talk to your midwife, your doctor, you can talk to your baby's pediatrician. They can all help answer questions about your baby's nutrition as you're phasing out breast milk. Ending your breastfeeding relationship can bring a whole mix of emotions. You might feel sad to be closing this phase. You might be super thrilled to have more freedom and be ready for what's next. Both of these emotions are normal and healthy. Even if you hit a few snags along the way, I promise that you will not breastfeed forever. Eventually, your body will be your own again. Your baby will be happily eating all kinds of solid foods, and you will be on to the next parenting adventure. Weaning is mostly something that you navigate on your own, but you have resources if you need it. If at any point you develop a fever or flu-like symptoms, that could signal mastitis. If a plugged duct or engorgement is not resolving, if you need to stop breastfeeding quickly for a medical reason, if your mood dips and stays low, talk to your doctor, your midwife, your pediatrician, a lactation consultant. All of these professionals can help you manage the physical side safely, or the emotional side if you're struggling with that. The big takeaway is that you don't have to figure this all out alone. To recap today's episode, we talked about why weaning gets so little attention. There's very little practical support for it. We walked through everything from social pressure that comes with your feeding choices, all of the valid reasons that mothers decide to stop. Any reason, including just that you're over it and you don't want to do it anymore, is valid. A big piece of this that we talked about in depth was the demand and supply principle. And that explains why weaning gradually is easier on you and your baby. I walked through a pile of tips for daytime weaning and nighttime weaning, along with some things if you have to wean quickly or if you're weaning from pumping. We also talked about some troubleshooting so that if you do run into a speed bump along the way, you can identify it and know what to do to resolve it and get through it. We also talked about some things to decrease your supply, like cabbage leaves, Sudafed, and herbs, and also the emotional side of stopping breastfeeding. And I ended with sharing my silly, slightly embarrassing hack that I think was helpful in both of my weaning journeys. I'd like to thank you for tuning into the Pregnancy Podcast today. I hope that you find this episode helpful. I know I was so stressed out when I was weaning both my kids, and I don't want you to feel that way. Please share the podcast if you have a friend that's pregnant. So many listeners discover the podcast through recommendations, and I appreciate you sharing it. As always, you can reach me, Vanessa, at pregnancypodcast.com. You can read the full article and see all of the resources that accompany this episode at pregnancypodcast.com/weaning. When you hit a point that you are ready to close out your breastfeeding chapter, having evidence-based guidance at your fingertips is important. Pregnancy Podcast Premium gives you every episode of the podcast with evidence-based information that you won't find anywhere else. Plus, every episode is ad-free and in a private feed in your favorite podcast app. Check it out at pregnancypodcast.com/premium.